I'm Zach Bagans, and this case is one I should have walked away from. Even after all the years I've spent dealing with haunted locations, cursed objects, violent entities, and spirits that attach themselves to the living, nothing prepared me for a single battered piece of 1,930 seconds technology that seemed capable of predicting tragedy. A vintage Emerson Model 29 tube radio. Dead, broken, unplugged, yet somehow broadcasting voices calling for help moments before the events actually happened. For the first time in a long time, I caught myself questioning the rules of the paranormal. Not because the activity was violent, not because the entity was powerful, but because this object, this radio, acted with intention, and it knew exactly what it was doing. This is the case file the Marsten family begged me to keep closed. But after what I witnessed, after what I learned, I can't stay silent. Not anymore. The initial call, the Marsten family reached out to me a few weeks before everything went wrong. They lived in an isolated farmhouse miles from anyone. A quiet place, open fields, old barns, peaceful distances. Someone's dream of escaping the chaos of the world. At least that's what they thought. The father, Daniel Marsten, sent the first message. His words were frantic, rushed, like he didn't care about sounding crazy. He said, "My radio is warning us before things happen. I think something is trying to hurt us or save us. I don't know which." A week later, he followed with another message. This time, his tone was colder, more controlled, like whatever was happening in that house had broken him. "It's not just the radio speaking. Something is in the walls, in the floors. It knows my family. I don't think it wants us here." Before I could schedule an investigation, the family vanished. They left everything behind: food, clothes, personal items, even their car. The police searched the property. No sign of forced entry. No sign of a struggle. No bodies. But inside the house, investigators found the radio sitting on a side table, still warm. It shouldn't have been warm. It shouldn't have been powered. And it definitely shouldn't have been broadcasting voices. But according to the officer on scene, the radio sputtered on when they entered the living room and played a single sentence in a child's voice. "We didn't make it." That's when they called me. When I stepped into that farmhouse weeks later, the entire structure felt wrong. The air was heavy, thick, stagnant. The kind of air that clings to your skin like damp cloth. The kind of air that hides things. But what bothered me most was the silence. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence that feels forced, like the environment is waiting for you to breathe so it can listen. Every case file has a moment, the point where you realize you're dealing with something intelligent, aware, and watching. Mine happened within the first 30 seconds. Because the moment I stepped inside, my recorder picked up a soft whisper coming from deeper in the house. Not a voice greeting me, not a warning, something much more disturbing. It whispered, "You're too late." At the time, I didn't know what that meant. Later, I would. Through interviews and collected statements, I pieced together what happened inside that farmhouse before the Marstens disappeared. The first incident began with the father. According to his wife, the radio turned on around 2:17 a.m., even though it was unplugged and played. Daniel's own voice screaming, "Help me, please help me." But Daniel was asleep next to her. She woke him, terrified. The radio shut off. Everything went quiet. But later that morning, Daniel went to the barn to fix a loose beam. His wife said she felt cold all over her body, like someone whispered a warning inside her spine. 30 minutes later, Daniel was found on the barn floor with broken ribs and a concussion, claiming he heard his wife calling him out there. She had never left the house. 2 nights later, it happened again. But this time, it used their son's voice. "Help me, it's coming." Half an hour later, their son collapsed in the yard with seizure marks and bruises around his neck. The mother tried to call for help, but the landline exploded with static. The radio turned on again, and a voice, Daniel's voice, whispered, "Get out before it sees you." That was the night they fled. That was the night the family was last seen. When I conducted my own walkthrough, it became clear the house wasn't just haunted. It was infected. Every room carried a different energy. The master bedroom felt like someone died in their sleep, even though no one did. The son's room was colder than the rest of the house, and EMF spiked in a perfect circular pattern around the bed. But the worst room, was the living room, where the radio Saturday. The moment I approached it, the air changed. My chest tightened. The atmosphere vibrated. This wasn't a random haunting. This was a deliberate interaction. I knelt next to the radio. The speaker cloth was slit down the center, straight, precise, as if something cut its way out. The wood casing was charred in patches, not burned by fire, but by heat from inside the device. The dial was cracked. The tubes were blown. The wiring was completely severed. There was no physical way for this radio to power on. Yet, as I examined it, it clicked. Once, softly, like a throat clearing before speaking. Then the dial glowed, and the static rose, low, slow, building like a distant storm. A voice pushed through, distorted, broken, terrified. He didn't die. I leaned closer. Who didn't? Static. Then, he's still here. The energy in the room shifted fast. A feeling I've only had in locations tied to violent deaths, dark rituals, or extremely negative entities. Something wasn't just haunting this farmhouse. Something was living underneath it. Something that once had a voice, and now used the radio to mimic others. At this point, part 1 ends to 1,000 plus words. Your part 2 will continue the case file in the same style. Zach reviewing evidence, reconstructing the events, describing the investigation in past tense, deep psychological tone, building toward the truth under the farmhouse. When I stepped away from the radio that first night, I thought I understood the danger inside that farmhouse. But everything I believed about hauntings shifted after reviewing the evidence collected from the Marsten family, because their experiences weren't isolated. They formed a pattern, one that pointed to something far older than a ghost. A presence that didn't just warn of danger, it created it. Days after the family vanished, investigators found an SD card inside the mother's camera bag. The camera itself was shattered near the back door like someone stomped it in panic. But the SD card survived. 47 audio files, all recorded during the final 2 weeks inside the farmhouse. The first file was harmless. Whined through the trees, footsteps on wood floors, normal domestic sounds. But around file 11, everything changed. A low hum, almost melodic, vibrates behind the background noise. When amplified, it sounded like a breath, a long inhale through teeth. But it wasn't human. The 17th file captured the first voice, a woman whispering, "Don't leave me here." The mother's voice shook as she responded, "Who are you? Where are you?" The whisper doubled, layered on itself with a delay that shouldn't exist. Don't leave. Me. Here. Like the house itself repeated the message. The 20th file contained a different voice, a deep male tone, stern, controlled. "You're not safe on the floor. It moves at night." The mother gasped. The son asked, "Who are you?" The voice answered, "Below. I am below." When the mother asked what that meant, the voice distorted into static so violently the microphone overloaded. But the next part, that was the moment everything clicked for me. The voice returned fainter, weaker. It took me first. Those recordings weren't warnings. They were confessions. File 32 was the last coherent recording before the family fled. You hear the father moving through the kitchen, frantic, out of breath. A cabinet slams. Keys rattle. The mother is whispering prayers. The son cries quietly. Then the radio powers on loud, violent, as if slammed by an invisible hand. A child's voice comes through. "Don't go outside. It's waiting." The father screams into the recorder. "What is waiting? What do you want?" Static floods the room. Then the sound of heavy footsteps, deep, wet, dragging, crossing the living room floor. The mother sobs, "It's in the walls." And the son whispers, "Dad, it's under us." The next sound was the final thing they recorded in that house. A thud beneath the floor, powerful, like something massive hit the beams from below. The house rattled. Objects fell. The radio screamed with layered voices shrieking, "Go!" Then silence. The family ran, and they never returned. After hearing the Marsten recordings, I knew I had to go into the one place the family never dared to document. The basement. I entered during daylight, hoping the energy was less active. It wasn't. The moment I opened the basement door, a wave of cold air hit me. Not natural cold. Cold from pressure. Cold from something drawing energy out of the environment. 2 steps down, my camera glitched. 4 steps down, my recorder picked up whispering too soft to understand, but constant, like voices trapped in insulation. At the bottom of the stairs, the smell hit me. Not death, not rot, something older, damp earth, burned metal, wet stone, the type of smell you get in caves carved by water, not basements built by hand. The corner to the right contained a broken furnace and stacks of old crates. But the left side, the concrete floor was cracked in a perfect circle. A sealed patch, decades old, poured smoother than the surrounding floor, as if someone covered a hole or sealed something in. EMF spiked immediately. A metallic groan vibrated under my feet. It didn't sound like pipes. It sounded like something breathing. Slow, deep, alive. I stepped back. The whispering grew louder. My recorder picked up 6 distinct voices. Men, women, 1 child, all repeating the same word. Below, I left the basement shaken but determined to uncover the truth. The county records told a very different story than the realtor had told the Marsten family. This land used to be part of a much larger property owned by a man named Arthur Blackwell in the early 1900s. Blackwell was a recluse, wealthy, obsessive, and convinced the land was a mouth that opened too easily. His journals, what remains of them, describe voices beneath the soil, breathing under the barn, and a hollow that mimics the living. Most historians wrote him off as insane, but I've investigated enough cases to know that insane often means aware of something no one else wants to face. In 1923, 3 workers mysteriously vanished while building the original barn foundation. Blackwell sealed the area with concrete the next morning. No explanation, no report, no funeral. The farm was sold 11 times over the next century. Each owner stayed an average of 5 months. The records never listed why, except for one. A tenant in 1974 wrote a single sentence in a complaint letter to the county. "Something is walking under my floor at night." The complaint was dismissed. 2 months later, the house burned down. No survivors, and no official cause listed. The farmhouse was rebuilt in the 80 seconds. A new foundation, a new basement, but they kept Blackwell's original sealed circle beneath the living room. They built on top of it, and that was the mistake. The radio's true purpose. Zach explains what he now believes. After reviewing evidence, interviewing neighbors, and analyzing the EMF signatures of the radio, I came to a conclusion that disturbed me more than anything else. The radio wasn't haunted. It was used by whatever was trapped beneath that sealed circle. Not to communicate, but to imitate, to lure, to mimic, to make the living react emotionally so fear, panic, and attention fed the entity. The radio was its mouth, its tool, its extension into the world above. And once it learned a person's voice, it owned it. The last piece of evidence the investigators missed was located inside the father's phone never sent, stuck in drafts. A message addressed to me, a message typed the same night they vanished. Zach, the voice you hear on the radio, isn't the one who needs help. It's the one that took the others. Don't trust anything it says. The final line was typed at 3:46 a.m. If the house is silent when you enter, it means it's listening. And when I first walked inside that farmhouse, it was silent. Completely, unnaturally silent. The kind of silence that hides something breathing just beneath your feet. Something patient, something aware, and something that didn't warn the Marstens. It hunted them. When I left the farmhouse after my initial walkthrough, I knew I couldn't treat this like a normal case. Not with the evidence, not with the patterns, not with what the Marsten family captured in their last days. This wasn't a haunting, this was containment, and something on that land wanted the containment broken. My next step was to conduct a full overnight lockdown, but this time I approached it as a forensic reconstruction, not a live investigation. I wanted to understand what the Marstens saw, what they heard, and how they reacted up until they disappeared. To do that, I needed to retrace every step of their final 48 hours. And that began in the one place I kept avoiding, the basement. When I opened the basement door for the second time, the temperature shift was immediate. A drop so sudden it felt like stepping into a freezer. But what bothered me more was the sound. A faint scratching, not loud, not frantic, slow, steady, rhythmic, like nails, long nails dragging lightly across concrete. The sound wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the sealed circle in the floor. I descended the steps with caution, recorder running, EMF meter in hand. Halfway down, the air pressure increased, my ears popped, the hair on my arms lifted, and the EMF spiked so hard the device vibrated. At the bottom of the stairs, the sealed circle looked different from before. A hairline fracture had formed along the edge, small, barely visible, but new. Something had pushed upward, something strong. As I approached, the scratching stopped instantly. Dead silence. Then, a voice. A male whisper. Not from the radio upstairs. From inside the basement itself. Zach. I froze. Not because of the voice. Voices are normal in cases like this. But because I recognized the tone. It sounded like the Marsten father, but distorted. Like he was speaking through a throat that no longer worked. I stepped back, keeping the circle in my peripheral vision. Daniel, is that you? Silence. Then, the whisper again. It took us. It lives on the breath you give it. I didn't respond. He continued. It learns the voices of the dying. That's how it speaks. That's how it hunts. My recorder captured everything, but even the recorder couldn't hide the truth. That wasn't Daniel's voice. It was using Daniel, mimicking him, practicing. After leaving the basement, I spent hours reviewing every audio file, every EVP, every EMF spike. The patterns were unmistakable. Whenever someone inside the farmhouse experienced fear, whenever they cried out, whenever panic overtook them, the radio activated. Not randomly, not at night only, not as a spirit reaching out. It activated in direct response to fear. Fear was the trigger. Fear was the catalyst. Fear was the food. And the voices that came through were never warnings. They were rehearsals, copies of the living, copies of the dying, copies of the hunted. The entity didn't predict what was going to happen. It created the conditions for those events to happen. It manipulated reactions. It fueled terror. It fed, and the radio was its mouthpiece. One entry in the police file stood out. A deputy responded to an unrelated emergency near the Marsten property. While in the area, he heard a woman screaming help from inside the farmhouse. He radioed for backup and rushed to the door. It was locked. Windows were shut. No signs of movement, but the screaming continued from the living room. Backup arrived within 3 minutes. And inside, no one. No signs of a struggle. No fresh footprints. The house was completely empty, except for the radio, warm to the touch. According to the deputy's written statement, the radio spoke a final sentence before going silent. She won't make it in time. 2 hours later, a woman from the next county was reported missing. She was found dead the next morning, strangled. The death occurred at the exact time the deputy heard the screams. The police dismissed the connection, but after hearing the Marsten tapes, I couldn't. The radio didn't warn of her death. It replayed it. The entity mimicked the final cries of a woman dying miles away. Distance didn't limit it. Fear didn't bind it. It fed on the emotional energy of the living. And once the victim's fear peaked, the entity gained their voice. A structural engineer I consulted told me something I hadn't considered. The foundation under the farmhouse wasn't level. It dipped, slightly, but unnaturally, like soil had shifted over time beneath the house. He scanned the basement with ground-penetrating radar. What we found shouldn't exist. Beneath the sealed circle, roughly 12 feet down, was an open chamber carved into the soil, perfectly circular, big enough for a person or multiple people. The chamber stretched into a second, narrower tunnel, and that tunnel led farther. The engineer didn't want to dig. He said the ground felt wrong, like it wasn't stable, but the diagram was clear. Something was buried under the farmhouse long before the first structure was built. A cavity, a pit, a chamber designed for something or someone to stay below, and the sealed circle was placed directly above it. A lid, a lock, a warning, but over time the seal cracked, the soil thinned, and whatever lived inside that chamber began to reach up. In the back of a drawer inside the farmhouse, the police missed something. A small spiral notebook, the mother's handwriting, short entries, scattered sentences, written during a time of fear. One page stood out. The radio isn't warning us about danger. It's repeating what it hears below the floor. Another page. Something down there speaks in the voices of the lost. And the last entry, the voice that sounds like my husband isn't my husband. It's learning him. The writing stopped mid-sentence. The pen was still pressed into the page, as if she was pulled away. After going through all the evidence, all the recordings, all the logs, all the diagrams, everything pointed to one truth. The entity used the radio as a tool, not for communication, not for prediction, for temptation. It needed emotional fuel to push against the seal, to weaken the barrier, to reach the surface. The Marsten family didn't stumble into a haunting. They became the final force needed to break the containment. And everything the radio played, every voice, every scream, every warning, wasn't the past, wasn't the future. It was the entity practicing, testing, mimicking, until it could speak clearly enough to be believed. And once it perfected their voices, the family disappeared. Not by abduction, not by violence, by imitation. Something beneath that house learned how to sound human. And once it could speak like them, it no longer needed them. By the time I reached the final phase of this case, the evidence no longer felt like a haunting. It felt like a warning from the people who built that farmhouse, a warning from whatever lived beneath it, a warning from the past that the Marsten family never understood. And now I needed answers not from the house, not from the land, but from the one person who'd seen more than anyone. The previous owner, his name was Henry Locke, 84 years old, lived in a retirement home 2 towns over. When I walked into his room, he didn't ask who I was. He didn't ask why I came. He didn't even look at me at first. He just asked, "Is the radio still playing?" I told him yes. He shut his eyes, not in fear, in resignation. Then he said something that sent a chill through my whole body. "You can't shut it off." "Not really. You can only decide who hears it." I asked him what he meant. He said the radio was never meant to be plugged into a wall. It wasn't designed to play stations. It was designed as a monitor, an alarm system, a device built by his grandfather not to communicate with the dead, but to detect what was beneath the ground. Something in the soil used to make noises, he told me. People heard it when the house was first built, so my grandfather made a machine that could pick it up. Not a radio, a receiver, a detector, a warning device. But over time, the sounds from below changed. They started forming patterns, rhythms, then words that didn't belong to anyone above the ground. Locke looked at me and said, "It doesn't predict death, son. It echoes it. It has always echoed death, even before the victim knows they're dying." I asked him how the device could possibly do that. He shook his head. "It doesn't echo time. It echoes fear. Fear carries farther than sound." To him, fear was like a transmission. And whatever lived in the chamber beneath the house fed on that transmission. "It learned our voices," he whispered. "And once it learned them well enough, we left." I asked him one final question. Where did the Marsten family go? His answer was simple. They didn't leave. Not really. They just stopped being themselves. I went back, not because I wanted to, because cases like this demand closure. Dark entities gain power through the unknown, through mystery, through the fear of unanswered questions. But when the living confront the truth, even if the truth is horrifying, it breaks its grip. That's what I told myself as I walked up the dirt path to the farmhouse for the final time. But nothing prepared me for what I found. The front door was open, not forced, not broken, just open, as if someone inside had been expecting me. The radio was already playing, static, soft at first, then rising, layering, Multiple voices, overlapping, whispering my name. Zach, Zach, Zach. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just listened, because in that moment something became clear. Those voices weren't calling to me. They were mimicking me, practicing, repeating, learning, trying to sound like me. I stepped closer. The EMF meter maxed out instantly. My recorder picked up heavy distortion, like interference from inside the walls. And then the radio spoke with one clear voice. We can sound like anyone. I went straight to the basement. The moment I opened the door, a smell hit me, earth, dampness, and something metallic. The crack in the sealed circle had grown wider, not from the top, from below. Soil had been pushed upward, like pressure was building underneath. I shined my flashlight into the fracture. Behind the layer of broken concrete, I didn't see soil. I saw wood, rotting wood, wooden boards, boards nailed together horizontally, like the top of a lid. A coffin. There was a coffin under the sealed circle, and whatever lived in that chamber had been pushing the coffin upward until it cracked the concrete. I backed away slowly, and the basement went silent. Then, a sound not from the fracture, not from the coffin, from the stairs. Footsteps, light, soft, uneven. Someone was coming down. I raised my camera. No one was there. But the footsteps continued, descending one step at a time. Then a voice whispered inches from my ear, "Leave it sealed." It wasn't a threat. It was a plea, a human voice, and faint, weak, and it didn't belong to the entity. It belonged to a man whose voice matched the last known recording of Daniel Marston. He hadn't escaped. He hadn't died. He was trapped below the house. His last words echoed through my recorder. "Don't let it learn you. Don't let it play you next." I left the basement immediately and sealed the door behind me. I called the county. I reported a structural hazard. I requested a full condemnation of the property. 2 days later, the farmhouse was sealed by local authorities. Hazard signs placed on every entrance. The ground flagged as unstable. The basement completely restricted. The radio was confiscated as evidence. For weeks, I expected updates, results, some kind of closure. But all I received was a one-page notice stating, "The device ceased functioning once removed from the property." But I knew that wasn't true. The device didn't lose power. It lost proximity. It needed the chamber beneath the house. It needed the fear in those walls. It needed the coffin, whatever was inside it, and the voices that died around it. Without the house, the radio was just metal. But the entity wasn't gone. It was still sealed beneath that farmhouse, waiting, listening, learning. In every case I've investigated, fear acts like a beacon. But this was the first time fear was the currency, the energy source, the mechanic that drove everything. This entity didn't torment. It didn't chase. It didn't attack. It studied. It listened. It repeated. Then it replaced. The Marstons didn't flee. They were erased, piece by piece, voice by voice. And the radio wasn't warning them. The entity beneath that farmhouse was ancient long before electricity ever existed, long before the land was settled, long before radios were built. But once it had access to human voices, human fear, and human emotion, it evolved. Now it waits in the chamber below the sealed circle, a place that was never meant to be uncovered, a place designed to keep its inhabitant contained. And if the seal ever breaks fully, it won't need a radio to speak. It will already know the voices of the living, because it learned them from the dead.